Good morning. As Mark said, I'm delighted to be here again. I think it's probably the fourth or fifth presentation I've given to the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy, and I'm delighted that our work, which is very different, I think, from the other presentations you have, fits into the ethos and principles and aims of the organisation. Grand Union Orchestra, briefly, brings together musicians from all over the world. Most of them live in London, and we do big shows which involve amateur performers as well, largely from East London. You'll be aware that the demographic of the UK today is extraordinary, and East London, and especially the area in which I lived, Hackney and Tower Hamlets and Newham, is the most diverse of all. And one of the things that we aim to do practically is bring together people from the local communities, involve them in workshops and education activities and large-scale shows. And I'll show you an example in about 5 minutes. And moreover, to use their own experience. And it's very important, the notion of authenticity of performers is not a new one, but in order to make things moving and immediate and deliberate and connect with people, especially people from different communities, you need performers from those communities. So the professional orchestra has musicians from China, India, Bangladesh, various parts of Syria, Israel, Lebanon, North Africa, various European countries, including Poland and Bulgaria, South Africa, West African countries, the Caribbean, number of countries in South America. Moreover, most of these, hearing the tail end of their previous presentation, most of these people are, of course, British, and that's very important to be emphasising at this moment, I think, in our history. Anyway, I'll take you back to 1936, almost just over 80 years ago, on October the 4th, Sunday, October the 4th, 1936, Sir Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists, who were known as the Black Shirts, staged or wished to stage a big rally and march through the streets of East London. The Home Secretary gave them permission, refused to have the march cancelled, and they were supported by enormous numbers of police, including mounted police. The East End at that time was dominated by Jewish community, and a lot of Irish and Scottish as well, connected with the docks. The Communist Party was quite strong in those days, but the main thing was that the local people are astonishingly united. And last week, for example, I visited the Stepney Jewish Centre, where they have a sort of lunch club for largely now disabled old people. And I was putting these leaflets around and talking about it. And I would say 7 or 8 women came up to me and said, I was there, you know. These are 89, 90, 95-year-old people. And I also pointed out that, and I said, oh, yes, Murray, you were a girl then. I was not a girl. You were a woman at 12. And this is another kind of lesson that we learned, that they were looking after, and this is all underscores, I reckon, the spirit of unity that there is in these communities. Now, so today, the demographic of that area has very changed. There aren't many Jewish businesses anymore. It's overwhelmingly Bengali, Somali as well, Muslim, of course, predominantly, Turkish, and a whole lot of other racial and religious groups as well. Earlier this year, I thought this is a heaven-sent opportunity to highlight issues that actually affect our society at this moment. And so from about 8 February, March, we programmed a series of events, a number of smaller workshops and things, but we were going to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street. What happened was that the people turned out in such force that the march was unable to get through the streets, and the Metropolitan Police, in the end, said, "I'm sorry, Sir Oswald, you have to go home." And it's an iconic moment in British history generally, but obviously in the trade union movement and the labour movement. And it was simply the force of local people uniting. Now, since then, so the first show we produced was on the Saturday night, which was called Remembering Cable Street, which was very much looking at the past, and again, with all local groups involved, some representing the Jewish community, and there was a very moving piece which kind of remembered Auschwitz and the liberation of Auschwitz, for example, but also modern dwellers in East London, including a very lively Somali group. We also have a lot of asylum seekers in the area too, particularly from Central Africa, from the Congo. And so it was another very moving episode for them. So we're bringing it up to date. And on a Sunday night is deliberately called After Cable Street. My interest as an artist, as a musician, as a composer, is not so much in the past, which is the point of this talk, although I think we're too concerned often with anniversaries, people's birthdays, deaths of composers at certain points. But it's actually the present, and it's the lives of the people that we work with. So After Cable Street on the Sunday night was a lot of new material. It's what's happening today. Now bear in mind that when I put all this together earlier in the year, we hadn't had the referendum. Then can you imagine how much relief the whole thing was thrown into, and has been since, with the appalling rise in hate crime in this country, the religious and racial intolerance that is on the rise, which nobody, I think, was sleepwalking into disaster, myself. And one of the things, but it seems to be not, Cable Street last week, got such little mention in the papers. Nobody bothered to say, this is what we should be looking at. This is what happened 80 years ago. And remember, in 1936, Hitler had begun to entrench himself in power. Mussolini had been dictator of Italy for about 10 years, and Salazar in Portugal. Franco, the Spanish Civil War was about to start. Franco would be dictator in another year's time. These dictatorships in the Iberian Peninsula did not end until a generation ago, the mid-1970s. And where was any of this in the referendum debate? As somebody remarked earlier, these are exactly the issues that should have been coming up. Are they coming out now? I don't know. But we have, 80 years ago, a fantastic example to go back to and say, this is what happened. We didn't turn back the war, we didn't turn back entirely the rise of fascism, but at least the British people were alerted to it, and they volunteered in great numbers to fight in the Spanish Civil War, of course, at the same time. Now, East London, and since then, over the last 10, 15 years, there still have been racist marches in East London. The most recent one was only about 3 or 4 years ago, the English Defence League, which I don't know whether it exists still, mostly overtaken by UKIP, I guess, which is a fascist party by any other name. And that again was anti-Islamic. And so we're living in East London, which is 50% at least Muslim, and it seems open season on baiting them, on producing these provocative demonstrations. Anyway, I could go on ranting like that for a long time, but the main point is that we as musicians, as artists, there's only a limited amount we can do about it. Now, this particular excerpt was from a piece we did about a year ago, a glorious theatre in North London called the Hackney Empire, and it was called Undreamed Shores, and it was about migration, because that was the key issue last year. Again, I have to say, nobody was very interested in debating this either during the election, which is when this show came out. So here's a snapshot, a video snapshot, I call it, which shows you what the Grand Union Orchestra does in order to contribute to these particular questions. And this is Undreamed Shores. It's very... And last Sunday, we produced a spectacle like that on effectively the themes of racism, xenophobia. And I have to say, in the end, they're hopeful. As you can see, it ends on a high note. So we can't leave an audience. We have to show some hope for the future in an East London, lovely East London venue. Now, palpably, why that's fairly breathless. The whole show is about an hour and a half long. If anybody wants a full-length video, I have some on sale, in fact. Yes. You'd like one. Palpably, the performers come from almost every conceivable racial, cultural background. And that is the point. Moreover, even in that, you hear, for example, at the beginning, West African chants, one that's migrated to Cuba, and there's a Yoruba chant that's gone to Brazil. And there was another one later, Elegua, and then Jemanja. So these sort of mythical figures are built into it. You can hear the strong Indian influence as well, from Bangladesh and India, and so on. And those are the elements you take. In the end, I would hope that expressed. There was a Congolese woman, the charismatic African woman, I was talking about. And in the end, I would hope that those express that, that helps you express the experience of the people on stage. Now, I think there's not a lot more to say, to be honest. It's how you can take not only historical events like Cable Street, but the material, the culture, the songs, the music, the instruments, indeed, of all the musicians that there are in Britain today, particularly East London is particularly rich in them. We're very privileged, fortunate in that respect, and use them to create a culture which represents, in some way, the face of Britain today. And it has. I don't know why we're so slow to acknowledge that the demographic has changed to the point that the big artistic institutions, the cultural institutions of the South Bank, the opera houses, the orchestras, the Barbican, really take no note of the changing demographic. Where is the art that is going to appeal to these people when there's an endlessly diminishing, elderly, wealthy, middle-class audience, white audience that's going to these things? We seem content to spend all our money still on those privileged few. I have to say, it's difficult for me to say this because I brought up in that tradition and I love European classical music, and as well as jazz, obviously. But these two things are linked. Until we produce an art or a culture that somehow expresses the hopes and aspirations of our mixed demographic, we are going to be at the mercy of the rise of these appalling social forces, the xenophobia and that kind of populism. Because I think, and this is a personal opinion, art has to be it's the only thing that can stop demagogues or political movements. It's the only thing that can influence people in the end. And I say we are sleepwalking into a disaster because we're not taking sufficient note of these things. And if there was a kind of combined movement, as a Guardian writer called for this earlier in the week, that it's up to musicians, artists, and journalists, writers, to actually also to take stock of what's happening. And the point of my reflecting on the past is that there are many events like Cable Street, that's 80 years ago, that you can bring to life and then illuminate the present in a much more vivid and dramatic way. And of course, we'll go on doing it, and it's an exhilarating thing to do. And I'm going to say finally, there is all this can be translated into education. And a few months ago, we were commissioned to produce an event in a large hall in South London, in Croydon, which was with 300 school children on stage. And this final excerpt is, in fact, another 2-minute, very quick rush through all that. But you'll hear all these musical styles again referred to, African, Caribbean, South Asian, all appear, and the children are all working with musicians from these traditions, and therefore, and they themselves come from them. And Croydon is another, because it has the immigration department there, even more migrants or people awaiting a leave to remain in Britain are there. And the schools are aware that they are simply not taking any account of them. So these initiatives are another step in that direction. So it's not only building on past experience, reflecting on the past, the history of the past, but it's actually paying respect to, and in some way building into and building on the traditions, the cultural traditions of all these musical styles from around the world. So here is, and we called it Music Untamed, because the other important thing is in music is improvisation, and a lot of what we do is concerned with collective or solo improvisation. So I'll leave you with just this. But 300 children get glimpses of music that they didn't think existed, and it's all amongst them.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Tony, for an excellent presentation. It's getting better every year, so in that sense, and now I think the only option is that we need to actually go and hear one of your performances live. So we definitely should try to think about that next time the ICD is here, that we can maybe integrate that. It would be really interesting. So for me, that's my next step, hopefully. But we're happy to take comments and questions from all of you. As always, if you can briefly introduce yourself when posing the question, so Tony knows where you're from, would be great. We'll start here. Okay.
Introduce yourself, Professor. Thank you. Professor Hall, Ian Hall, an Oxford musician, and
Ian Hall.
Ian Hall, that's right.
Look at the accent. Look at his accent.
We were there at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. I recognize this when I came in. You forgive me. I'm not in the best of health these days. That's why it didn't come at all, really. It's an afterthought that I was able to come to a conclusion to Congress. And may I say how delighted I am to have heard a tiny bit of your presentation and to enjoy the music of the children. Perhaps you say a word. I've got several points. One is how you collect these wonderful young musicians I saw on the screen. And also I'd like to say that I've, as you probably know anyway, been using music as far as I'm able to advance racial harmony. I think that some of the events which I put on, what we now call the UPF, have been very much a part of, and indeed it inspired with Margaret and Robin and so on. The second thing, when you told me about the children, or the young people, I should say, is to say that we are now still at the beginning of this business of intercultural activity, multicultural, and I spent many years as the president, the inaugural president, in fact, of the Commonwealth Arts Association. I wonder if you'd tell us, I hope to be able to grab you for a private conversation, a bit of nostalgia and so on afterwards. But at this stage, I wonder if you give me some idea of where do we go from here as regards using music in this way. As you probably know, I spent time in Ghana as director of music for Kwame Nkrumah, the founding president of the place. And at that point, 1964, we were beginning to think about getting all these cultures together and involving young people. But lifetime, certainly after half a century of doing this, I found that the impedimenta, the difficulties, are really so almost insuperable. I'd like to hear from you how you can help us as regards that.
Well, have you still got those videos up there? Well, since you weren't here and several other people weren't, I would like to, because you've only seen the children, that's only part of it. Can we play the first one again? It will certainly, there'd be no harm in doing that. The music for me is much more important than me speaking, and then I'll answer your question. But have a look at
That's the thing. Thank you very much. Now I've got an extra microphone in my head.
Well, I'll answer your question. Just watch this.
Toyota motor maker gets up at dawn in the cherry blossom dormitory.
Now, the point is, that is intergenerational. It's not young people. It's actually working across the whole spectrum of age. That's East London. All those performers come from Hackney, Tower Hamlets, Newham area, and the professional musicians mostly too. The point I made earlier was that it's really important to gain authenticity and to move people, that you have to have people from the cultures that you're representing to tell the stories that you're telling on stage. Now, the education work we do grows out of that. It's a byproduct. So what you saw when you came in was actually other things that you couldn't do if you weren't doing the original artistic work. Those are most virtually, well, they're all my compositions or arrangements. And so my job is to work with musicians, whether amateur, professional, young or old, from as wide a range of musical cultures as possible, and to make them make a coherent expression of what British identity is today. And then passing that on to children is, I have to say, a secondary objective. And all our education practice, which is quite extensive, has grown out of the artistic practice. Were it not for the fact that 30 years ago, I was fascinated by migration, exile, movements of people, and therefore xenophobia, and therefore reasons why, and we had, for example, Chilean exiles in this country, or political exiles. We had, in order to express all that, which I had to actually work with people who were from there, so the Chilean musician actually came from a Pinochet jail, in fact, and was part of the amnesty. And it's only since then has the education stuff grown out of it. But you can't force it. And it depends on individuals. I'm very lucky because I have that particular imagination, but even luckier that I have all those musicians who go with me. And I was talking about, in fact, when I started this, only last weekend we were doing a project based on commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street, which the fascist march through East London. The point of taking that as an example is actually to reflect on the rise, frankly, the rise of fascism today. The Evening Standard last night, hate crime is up 40% since later. And that's what art and music can do. And that would be my mission. And through that, to inform young people that that's what is happening to them.
Well, I wanted to see, you mentioned that you got the East End sorted out. I had, as part of my field organisations, the Inner London Educational Authority, ILEA, which of course allowed me to interact creatively with the majority of the young people in what we now call the comprehensive schools. And I did do a project in 1979 involving not only Eton, Harrow and those sort of places, but also Sherborne School, all independents. I spent a year going around and giving talks and collecting data. And what I found is that there's still a tremendous, I hate to say this, I mean, you will forgive me, saying that the efforts that you have expended and that I still am expending in my twilight years is not really supported by the government of this country.
Well, that may be true, but let me say that we are a national and as an international touring organisation, not confined to East London. But the only thing you can do, frankly, is to go on doing it. Whatever the opposition, whatever the lack of support, there's no point in whinging about it. You actually, if you have the purpose to do something, then you get on doing it. I don't like it any more than you do that it's not properly supported. But the only way, in my view, is by presenting great art. It seems that people, even by that sort of small excerpt, are quite moved by that. Now, that's so we have to get out and do it. We have to get 50, we have to get 500, we have to get 1,000 people into a theatre to see it. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Is it working? Yes, under the bottom. On the bottom.
Yeah, I remember this here. Wow. Oh, thank you very much. I think I'll first of all say that the project, I believe, is a very good one because music, as we all know, is entertaining and it brings people together. And definitely, like you said, it's showcasing the current identity of UK, which is very, very multicultural. And even the original identity of the English is, there's so many subcultures within it. But I want to say something about I want to ask one first question and then it has a second part to it. The first one is, you've got 300 children there performing, and worth listening to. How long did it take, or would it take to train and prepare these children to be able to do a performance that is of that standard?
You'd be surprised.
Okay.
about 6 weeks with maybe 3 sessions with each of them.
Okay.
Very, very quickly it's done because It was Claude Depper, who's a South African trumpet player, who's expert at these things. But he was leading a team there of some 6 or 8 musicians, including myself, all of whom worked together for such a long time. And it's partly based on improvisation, that we know how to teach people things by ear, we know how to assemble all the strands of music to make them sound effective. You can only do that if you are quite an experienced and quite a resourceful musician. A teacher can't do it, or because they're not taught to do that. And that's the other answer to the question. To make this work, you have to have real musicians. Musicians who are actually dedicating their lives to playing music. So you need the musicians who were in the first or the last excerpt. Those very musicians have to have that identity as musicians, as performers. They have to be moved by their performance, and then they can become role models, they're charismatic workshop leaders, or whatever. But it's only by them being great players, inventive, creative musicians in the first place.
Okay. And this particular show for the 300 kids, I don't know what sort of audience you had. That's number one. Number two, when looking at it, luckily it's the East End, where you have probably the style of music dominated by the pop and hip-hop culture. Where is this going to go to in another few years? Because as an African, for instance, one of the priorities is for each of these individuals to be able to have some level of skills or profession to be able to engage themselves economically, to be able to empower themselves as to have some level of living. So how would this also help them create or build a living for themselves for the future?
I'm afraid the brutal answer is they probably can't. And because and I think it's deceitful to suggest that very many people can become professional musicians, whether it is studio musicians, whether it's hip hop, whether it's symphony orchestra. We are simply the time does not exist now where, except for a privileged few, that you can actually make a living as a musician. One of the ways of doing it, of course, is to diversify your practice, as I and all my fellow musicians have done, in such a way that they spend time doing a little bit of all these things. And I have to say that running workshops with children like that and getting music out of them is also inspiring and creative activity, and you have to see it as that, I think. And I would say one final thing is that it has to be artistic. I'm not interested in data. I'm not interested in any academic study about who does what, whether it increases self-esteem or gets the GCSE results, all that stuff. And there's too much of that. We have to focus on the art itself and what it creates. And that is the only way forward, in my view.
We take one more question. Any questions? Any comments?
I think what you demonstrate, I think it's just an encouraging comment, really, or an optimistic comment, because I do think what you do is immensely valuable. I don't think it's on the way out. I don't think there's probably any town of any size in the country that hasn't got a samba band. It's not just in East London. It is, and it's across Europe, it's across the world. There are festivals all over the country in the summer, and every one of them has got a mixed race, mixed musicality, intergenerational, multi-genre band of some sort, whacking away in the corner of a field. But I think what's interesting about that now is that it doesn't represent the sole artistic endeavour or the sole musical endeavour of the people involved. I'm quite sure that if you took every one of those, or a good selection of the people that we just saw in the film, you'd find that they were musically active in another sphere. But it's probably acid techno, and it's probably a global form of acid techno, in the same way that every country, in a funny sort of way, we live in an age where we can nationality, genre, and musical instrument and no longer have all floated free of each other. So there is nothing particularly Nigerian about Nigerian music. There's nothing particularly English about English music. and all the music circulates the world as fragments, and in a strange way, you've produced a kind of global music locally in East London, whereas I'm quite sure that in the same way that every country in the world has its own notion of rap as a folk music now, that most of the people in that orchestra will be musically active, and that the way that they're musically active at home, online, publishing stuff on SoundCloud, is as informed by your involvement with what you do as it is by any other aspect of their lives. So I do think the work is going on, and it is vitally important, and I'm very pleased that I came to see you. Tell us about it.
Well, you're right, there's organisations like the Samba bands. They're not the only ones, of course. There are the Indian groups, the African drumming groups. Djembes are very popular now, much to the distress of the Ghanaians, but that's another matter. Who loves the Congos better? But and I will also say that they're hugely valuable to us, because we don't. East London happens to be that illustration. We do that. We tour all over the country, so we have produced shows like that on a regular basis in Leicester, Birmingham, Nottingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Sunderland, and precisely using those resources that you're talking about, and getting steel band and sound schools kind of involved in. Moreover, in Paris, in various parts of Portugal, in Lisbon and Setúbal, in Melbourne, in Dhaka in Bangladesh, in Shanghai, in Singapore. We've done it everywhere. It is completely exportable if you have the right people to do it, on the same principles apply. Anyway.
Can I just say something? I'm sorry I had to go down for an emergency, not emergency, for some work. But I am so inspired by what you're doing, and because what you said about nobody talked about this great thing that you did 7 days ago, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, 7 days ago today. Anyway, so I was thinking, okay, just simple folk like us that really like what you're doing, what can we do to make it more well known? And
well, in that particular, my point in that particular case was that Townhouse Council wasn't very helpful in terms of publicising, as it has in the past, the 70th and 70th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street. There were huge events, which not only the March and Rally, but concerts, we were involved in all those. They wouldn't do anything this year for various reasons, which we're not going to. And only at the very last minute did they produce, last Tuesday, on the day of the anniversary, under the great mural, which is, actually you should look that up, it's not illustrated there. They produced an event, and we turned out a very big community street band, in fact, to celebrate it. My point was that you have two things working together. You have the rally and the political side of Cable Street. They all turn up. Jeremy Corbyn was there, Sadiq Khan was there, and any other workers making political speeches. The whole point was then that was going on. It didn't get a lot of coverage, to be honest. Even The Guardian didn't follow the same report, or used an agency report, which I thought was disgraceful. But what they hadn't done was join that up with, we were the only ones doing cultural events that related to it, animating it in some way. And that's the disappointment, that you can't see these two things together. Now, it's the media, how we can influence journalists and to do that. But at the moment, to be honest, I think the problem is, like it was in migration last year, we were doing a big project around the time of the election on migration. I was due to appear on World at One at one point. Yes, they pulled it because the BBC was afraid of bias and afraid of what people might say. And there was no debate about migration, if you remember, for 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. And it's the same this year. Again, they're running scared. There is no debate about the aftermath of Brexit. There is no debate, really. There's no joining this up with the disgraceful figures that we're seeing. Now, somebody should surely be saying, it's more events like this, musical, it's theatrical events. Somebody should be taking this on and saying, this is the connection. But we exist in that vacuum. And I just think broadcasts and the press, beyond the Express and the Mail, who, let us remember, supported Mosley in 1936 and on the side of the fascists, so we have a one-sided debate. They're allowed to dominate it. Nobody is allowed to contradict this extraordinary extreme view that the Brexit vote has brought about. Let alone, come back to it, let alone balance up and see how these artistic events, cultural events are complementary.
Margaret, that was excellent. I believe we've got to change of plan, and you should play here than downstairs. Yeah? Sit over there. Okay.
First of all, let's express our sincere gratitude to Tony Haynes for excellent presentation. We wish you much success in the future development of the orchestra, and we hope that the tradition will continue.